queen bees have stingers, but I've never heard of them stinging a human. Queens have stingers that they will use to kill other queens, but they will not sting a human. I've never heard of that happening. Because queens, there's only one queen in a hive. And so what happens is if you introduce a new queen to a hive, but you don't kill the old queen, she might come through and do it for you. Because that's what queens do. Queens are the boss, and they want to run the show. Yes, sir?
How do bees make hives?
How do they make hives, like in the wild?
Yes. So like if there's no hive and all of a sudden it just gets there.
So that's probably from a swarm. So bees from a different hive split and created two hives, and then what they'll do is they'll find a new home in an area like a tree nook or your HVAC system or chimneys. That's a pretty common spot. So they'll find a nice nook where they're out of the weather, and they'll create a new home there that is safe.
What is it really made of?
Well, what they'll do is they'll make beeswax just like they do on these frames, but they'll attach it to the walls of the area that they're in. So they'll make frames that just dangle straight down from, say, the walls of the inside of a tree. So they'll just create their own walls with beeswax. So they'll make their own walls.
Then where does that...
You talked about the flow hives. What about the top bar hives? What's your opinion on those?
I've never used a top bar hive. The reason I don't is because extracting is really difficult. They're a lot harder to manage. These frames make it really easy to pull out an individual frame, check on things, but with top bar hives, they'll build those individual bars together, and then it can be hard to do hive inspections and check on how things are going. So I think it can be pretty difficult. So this type of hive is called a Langstroth hive, and I think that they're the easiest way to manage bees. But a lot of people enjoy top bar hives because it's a great way to harvest wax if your top goal is to create wax. Yes, sir?
Do bees have a lot of enemies?
So bees do have a lot of enemies. That's a good question. Bees have all sorts of enemies. Ones that you might expect, like bears, will get into a hive and eat up all of the little baby bees in the hive. So a lot of people think that bears want the honey in a hive because Winnie the Pooh sure likes honey. But bears are actually there to eat the protein from the larvae, the baby bees. And so they can knock down a hive pretty easily. But bees also have a lot of other predators. So for example, wasps can be a predator to bees. A strong hive will fight off wasps, but a weaker hive can get taken over by wasps. And wasps, just like the bears, they generally like to go in and eat the bees, not so much the honey. So they're in there for the protein because they're more carnivores.
What about spiders?
Spiders can get into a hive, but the bees will generally kill that spider and remove it. Yes, sir?
Which do you think goes faster, your spinning thingamabobber or that strainer?
Well, they're very different. So one is straining and one is removing the honey from the frame. So they're doing two very different activities. So one is not necessarily faster than the other.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
When you're managing your hive, how often are you checking those?
That's a really good question.
What exactly are you looking at?
Yeah, so her question is, when you're managing hives, how often do you check on them and how often do you look to see if there's honey? That depends. As a new beekeeper, I think it's fun to check every couple of weeks. So every 10 to 14 days to check on them. As long as you're careful to not kill the queen, then you can check on the bees pretty frequently, and it's fun to see them grow. And if you check on them every couple of weeks, each time you go in there, you'll see something you didn't see before. They've maybe filled out more frames, or they brought in a ton more nectar and have a lot more pollen. And so being able to see those results is really fun. Experienced beekeepers might check on them just once a month. So during the honey flow, as we call it, which is generally April, May, and June, I check on my frames probably every couple of weeks. Now something interesting here, I don't know if you guys can see it. Do you see these darker pockets here? That's pollen. That's a cell of just pollen. So I'll hold it flat so that you can see it here, but these darker cells here, that's pure pollen.
Do they cap those as well?
They sometimes they do. So you can see that dark cell of just pollen. And that pollen's orange in color. I've also seen pollen that is yellow, deep red, and sometimes even purple. And it just depends on the flower that they got the pollen from, which is also the same reason why you'll notice those honey jars there are different colors, because they've gathered the pollen and nectar from different flowers. And so it'll create, ooh, this one's good. Nice. Something that I'm going to try next year is instead of putting all 10 frames in my hive, I'm going to put just 9 in, and that'll give them more space to fill out the honey so it exceeds the edge of the frame, and I can cut the wax off much easier like this. So that's a good trick if you have frames that have wax that's already built up on it. Yes?
So I'm just assuming that a bee, like when you get one of those frames there, does it already come built with the cells in it?
There's a couple of options. I prefer buying the frames that have a pattern on it that has the hexagons, but what they do is it's just a pretty flat pattern. You can feel the hexagons and see them, but they draw it out with wax, which is what this white is. And you'll notice that because the foundation that I have is black, which is why it looks so dark.
Okay.
But some people buy just the bars here, the wood pieces, and then they have the bees create the wax themselves.
What would attract them to that? I mean, you plant, put a queen bee in it, or what would draw them?
Yep, so you can put what's called a package of bees, which is just bees and a queen, and they'll just start drawing out the wax. But bees will take much better to frames that have some natural wax built on them already. Does someone want to spin this? Go for it. Come on up. Start slow, and then you can get faster.
It's sticky now.
And so this is going to be the last, he's going to spin this side, we're going to flip into the other side, and then you'll notice here that this has started to filter through, and the more honey I put on here, the more weight will push that through faster. So that's why I like to harvest just once, because then I have more honey, more weight, the whole process goes faster. Then you only have to clean up once, get your equipment out once, and do all of that process just once. Yes, sir. Yes.
I have 2 questions.
Okay.
How do you get the bees in your hive, and are there bees that are bigger bees and they just protect the hive?
So your first question, how do you get bees in your hive? There's a lot of different options. You can buy a package of bees, which is just a box full of bees, and you can dump those into a hive, and they'll start building. Another option is you can buy what's called a nucleus hive, which is 4 frames just like these that have baby bees, a queen, and some pollen and nectar already, and you can install those into a hive box, and they'll start building out more from there. Another option is just to buy a hive from someone that has an existing hive. That is going to be a lot more expensive because you're paying for the equipment, the bees, and the time that it took to get that hive going. And then your other question was?
Aren't there bigger, stronger bees that protect the hive?
So there's 3 types of bees in a hive. You have worker bees, which are female bees that forage for nectar, build wax, guard the hive, and help nurse the bees. You have drones that mate with the queen, and you have the queen. So just 3 types of bees. And the worker bees are all about the same size, and they're the ones that protect the hive. So they're actually the smallest of the 3. But they fly the easiest because they're smaller. Yes, sir. You got it?
Invade other beehives?
So do beehives invade other beehives? Yes, sometimes they do. So especially this time of year, it's called robbing. So what might happen is a strong beehive might find weak beehive that's not doing too well, and they're trying to store up and get as much honey going into winter as possible, so they will go in and rob that hive of all its honey, and it will die because it has no honey. So sometimes that will happen, but a beekeeper, yep, which is not terribly different than what I'm going to do by putting these frames that are still a little sticky with honey next to my hive. They're going to clean them up, rob those frames out, and bring that back to their hive.